I'm going to show you guys how to put a lift on your Toyota Corolla. It's going to apply to many different vehicles. Toyota Corollas for a lot of different years. I'll put in the description which ones. But we're going to be doing a 40 millimeter lift, which is somewhere around 1.5 inches, a little bit more than that. So the lift consists of a strut spacer, or a strut mount spacer, whatever you want to call it. I've lifted cars a lot of different ways, and this is one of my favorites, along with subframe drops. So first thing you've got to do, obviously, is pull your strut out. Unfortunately, there's a little bit of work you have to do. You can't just stick this on there because obviously the studs are too short. And you can't just put longer studs in because the spring is in there. So we do have to fully disassemble the strut. It really isn't too hard. You just need a few tools, tools you are going to have to go buy if you don't have them. And that's going to be spring compressors. So this is the one that I would recommend. There are lots on the market. I have several types. This specifically is the one that you want to use. So first up, obviously, you need to remove these nutticles here. And then, unfortunately, the new studs are bigger. So not only are we going to have to press these out, press the new ones in, but we're actually going to have to drill out these tops. So a little extra difficulty there, but whatever. So go ahead and grab your spring compressors, and we're going to spin in place here. Sit them down. And just tie up here for a second. You may have to adjust them on this side. Turn this one out just a little bit. These are super easy. This is a lot of spring compressors. This is that one. All right, so once you got both stuff down, then we can start to actually tighten. What we want is the spring just move around a tiny bit. Do it as evenly as possible so you want to do that. Okay, that should probably take care of it. Maybe a little more. Okay, let's try all the way down. So hopefully that's enough. You can test this. If it's not, just go ahead and back this top net off just a little bit. If you haven't done it enough, then you'll know. You're just going to see the top edge falling as you're loosening it. And it's not, so we got it out. Alright, so go ahead and pull the top net out. You're just going to be who knows what kind of size. This I think is like 13, 16, something up to 8. Alright, so now we can remove this guy. This is where you can get hurt. You don't do this right, so don't be stupid. Alright, so I'm going to use the socket method. If you bend this, it isn't that big of a deal because guess what? You've got an old one on your old strut. So not the end of the world. Okay, here we go. There's the first one. Just make sure you have it centered over there and your socket's big enough to accept the whole stud. There's our second one. And okay, so for drilling, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. Obviously, the new stud won't go in there. So you just want to take a drill bit that is the same size, I would say, as the shank or the threads. Not the same size as the knurling bit, because the knurling bit needs to be a press fit. So we'll go ahead and get it set up here in the vise. It's not going to clamp down super tight. Just tighten up so it doesn't spin around. You don't want to hold this with your hand or anything. This is a 10 millimeter bit. I just happened to grab a metric. Use whatever you want, or you can use a 10 or cross that over to a standard. Alright, there we go. So we don't really care about being super precise. We just want a bigger hole so we can stick our thing in. Alright, next up we're over at the press. And we want to insert our extension or our stud just like that. This one I kind of bent up, to be honest, off camera. I put them in backwards. So I'm going to have to probably straighten out this strut mount later on, but it is what it is. Press this guy in there. Okay. Should look just like that. If it isn't perfectly straight, you can bend it out later on. It isn't too big of a deal. Alright, back to our strut. All we got to do is just set that thing on there and spin the nut on. Alright, now that our studs are in, we can check our fit of the spacer. So I've noticed that some will have these metal inserts on top and some won't. There's a metal insert right here. So I don't know, just I guess sometimes they make them like that and sometimes they don't. So we want the metal insert away or up on top. Alright, there we go. So yep, that's pretty much it. Now it's up to you. Some struts are going to have little isolators. Let me remove this so I can show you. right here. Little like foam isolator. You can remove that if you want to. I don't really care, so I'm gonna leave it there. Obviously, our studs are straight enough because this slid right on. You would know if you need to bend them before you put it in the car by if this doesn't slide on. Okay. Go ahead and run one of your nuts all the way down. You don't got to put in all of them. I'm just going to put in 2. The reason I'm doing that is because I need to match up this hardware. I only found 3 nuts when I went and looked real quick, so I'm going to have to find another one. All right, so once that's done, we'll come back down here and hopefully we can get this assembly bolted up without having to do too much crazy stuff. All right, so I've already got this piece slid inside here. You're just going to kind of push up and down on this spindle here, or knuckle, whatever you want to call it, until you can get one of these bolts started. I like to do the bottom one first usually, but that one's being a pain, so start with the top. And then these are the bolts that you would possibly have to get a slotted version of if your alignment is way off. This is usually the most difficult part of the install, getting this stuff to line back up again. So. That's kind of a weird sound. So it looks like at full extension we're rubbing one of the brake lines, so that's going to be fun. We're going to have to address that. May not be an issue under load. I guess we'll just have to see. So I'm going to have to do inner tie rods on this on both sides, so I'm not going to fully put this together right now, even I don't think. All right, there we go. So this is our brake line is going to be pretty close. It's definitely maxed out at full extension. So what I'm going to do, I think I'm going to move this bracket. I think I'm going to move the brake line bracket over. So when I figure out how to do that, I'll resume the video and go from there. I'm not going to bolt this up right now either. I'll probably end up zip tying it to the strut body. All right, so we're going to move on to the back, the rear lift kit. So right here we have a rear complete strut assembly, and this is the spacer here. So you'll notice the spacer has 2 different ways that it can go. You're going to want to make sure that you do everything exactly the same as the strut that came out. So for example, this would be for driver's side, and that would be for passenger side. So we're going to go ahead and go pull that one out. One bit of advice, you're going to want to use a chrome socket for this, not an impact socket. An impact socket will get stuck down inside here. We are going to have to disassemble this and press in 2 studs, kind of like we did in the front. So if you can do the front, you can definitely do the rear. The rear is a little bit easier. We're going to end up pressing these 2 studs out, pressing the new ones in just like I showed you in the front. But for this one here, we're actually just going to cut a bolt that's a little bit longer. Well, I say cut a bolt. You may have one that's the right length. You need a bolt that measures 1 3/4 inches from the bottom here to the end, not from the top. So I've got one that's a little bit too long. I'm going to cut that. We're going to make that one work and thread it in from the top there. If you really want to, you can drill this out and press in another stud. I think it's too much work. It is a lot easier if you just find a bolt that already threads in there. Depending on the strut that you buy, these are going to be more difficult to drill out and get rid of. Some just have a little captive nut. That's easy. You can take it off. Some are actually like a riv nut insert, which are a pain in the butt. So to do this, you've got to remove the rear seat. You're just going to pull up on the rear seat and yank it out of there. And then down here, you've got a 12mm nut right there. And then this bolster, this piece right here, will lift up. And that's going to expose the 3 bolts, which are right underneath there. So I'm going to go ahead and get it out. I don't think there's a reason to video this, but I will video modifying it. Well, I'm going to video part of this anyway. This side ended up being a lot different than the other side. I didn't realize my Corolla, the DX trim, had a built-in child safety seat, which is pretty interesting. But anyway, you got to remove that. There's 2 10mm bolts down there at the very bottom, 2 here at the top, and then 3 12mm bolts. 1, 2, 3. Then you can pull this thing out. Super goofy, kind of cool, I guess. The next thing that is a little bit interesting is, for whatever reason, Toyota ran the brake lines through the struts. And there's no way to remove the struts without opening the brake lines. Super stupid. I don't understand what the reasoning is behind that. So I'm just going to take a Sawzall, cut this off, because that's dumb. I'm not going to bleed the brakes just because I want to change the struts. So, yep, about to do that. All right, we've got the old strut out, the new one over here. You can clearly see which one of these bolt holes was used. This one was not, so this is going to be the way we want to orient our strut spacer, right? Using this one right here. So we need to go ahead and disassemble this one just like we did the fronts. I will tell you, this one is not under nearly the amount of spring pressure as the fronts are, so that's kind of nice. You just barely need to compress the spring, not very much at all, really. There you go, that's it. Trying to see the spring is swinging around. No need to overdo it. Make more work for yourself. I will tell you, this top hat is going to spin, so be careful. If you pull out through it, it may smash fingers, but it has a there. Just make sure when you put it back on that you match up the spring indentation on the top here. Wherever the spring is, we want to be in that same spot. So just make sure it goes back in there. The spacer is going to go right under the nut, and this only goes on one way. It has a flat spot in it. So we have these 2 that we need to press out right here. This may take a little bit more work than the fronts because you're going to have that give from the rubber. There we go. All right. Good news is these are the same exact hole size, so you're not going to have to drill these out. You can just pop these things in there, take it to the press like we did the fronts, and you're good to go. So scoot this in there the best that I can. There we go. All right. Okay, number 1. Okay. So remember, there's only one flat side. You can't see it, it's on the back, but it corresponds to the flat side here on the strut mount. Trace all the way down. Then we have spacer and then nuts. I think it's off the correct way. Yeah, I think so. All right, now be careful when you're tightening it up too, because things don't want to spin in hand. All right, so let's cinch up. Now go ahead and release spring tension, and we'll tighten that thing up the rest of the way. Okay, there we go. See, there's much spring tension behind it. I did just glue it with my hand. Stick it back in place. All right, and then we'll double check. Make sure the spring is sitting just like it was before, and it is. Then we'll give this nut here an extra chooch. Chooch, there we go. Okay. Alrighty, next up, we need to go get a bolt, and we need to make it pretty much this length. So I'm just gonna chop this guy here with the bandsaw. All right, now we just got to run our die out, clean up these threads, run it back and forth a few times. If you want to bevel this in the grinder, you can, but I don't think we're going to have a problem. I had some issues with the footage, unfortunately, at the very end, before I got the rear suspension in, but the car has been together for a while. I've probably been driving it for about a month, maybe around 1,000 miles on the lift here. And I've got some numbers that I can give you guys as far as how much we gained from the lift. So before, the car sat between the center of each wheel hub and the bottom of the fender lip. It was 14 7/8 inch in the front and 15 1/8 in the back. So adding those 30mm strut spacers, the front went up to 15 7/8, which is exactly an inch. And then in the rear, we went up 6/8 from 15 1/8 to 15 7/8. So the car sat perfectly level after the spacer kit. And then after a couple days of driving, like maybe 2 days, it had sagged quite a bit already. The car was definitely higher than this when I put the lift on. Unfortunately, I cheaped out on the struts. I bought some complete struts. I think they were FCS brand. And the springs on them were trash. So I'm going to have to go in and replace the springs. Unfortunately, I'm already looking at different options. I think it looks like Moog sells a station wagon set of front springs that may have a little bit more spring rate, a little higher spring rate, and then they sell a heavy-duty rear set. Now, it wouldn't give me the exact spring rates, so I think I'm just going to buy them and stick them on there and see what it looks like. But right now, we are quite a bit lower than when I first lifted it. Today, we are at about 14.5 in the front and 15 in the rear. So in the rear, we've lost an inch, and in the front, we have lost even more, which is pretty unfortunate. And what's even worse is I have spring spacers in here. So I've got 1-inch spacers in the back and 1-inch spacers in the front. And even with those spacers in here, this thing is still lower than when we started. So the factory springs were much better quality than these super cheap Chinese ones. So take a look inside there. You can see the twist-in spacers on the left and right. I've used these plenty of times. The driver's side is actually missing one. I guess it came out last time we went off-roading, but anyway, you can see at the top there how compressed the strut is. I can take my entire hand. So my middle finger here, actually my pointer finger even, just above where you can see, is over the top of the strut like this. So these springs have just totally collapsed after driving just a very short amount of time, which is pretty unfortunate, a little upsetting. But in the front, I've got those metal twist-in spacers. And then in the rear, let's see if we can get our lighting right, I have these rubber ones here. So there's one here in the front and one in the back. But same thing as the front. These springs haven't collapsed as much, but definitely not like they were when I put it in. I even contemplated taking the springs from the old struts and putting them on here. But I figured, you know, they're old and worn out. But man, I tell you what, old worn out quality springs are better than new garbage. But we'll go ahead and take a look at the rest of the car, because I'm sure you guys are interested in what's going on up here. So my buddy Levi, he owns Midlow Metalworks. He does custom, just, you know, welding fabrication, stuff like that. And I had him throw this together for me. And he also did a roof rack, but we haven't put it on. So threw this together like super, super fast. And I asked him to leave it in the raw. I didn't want it painted. So it turned out pretty awesome. And I tell you what, I use this winch at least, man, sometimes once a week, sometimes 3 times a week. It's super handy having a little car that has a winch on it. It's just like, you know, having a side-by-side or a four-wheeler that has a winch, but you can use it for a lot more things. Like I've pulled people out of the road, pulled bushes around the yard for yard work. I've pulled cars up onto trailers. I mean, it has been extremely helpful. Also, there are 1-inch wheel spacers on the car right now, which just get the wheels kind of flush or even with the fender wells. I went ahead and ordered some 2-inch spacers. Not that it's going to make anything better, but it'll just look cooler, that's all. And so right here we have our exterior winch controller hookup, but I've also wired it up inside. So right there we have our winch control for inside the car, right there. I went ahead and did some extra stuff too. We can have our LED pods up front, and then we've got our just 2 USB ports in here. So, but yep. So I've put right at 1,000 miles on this thing since doing all this work. I kind of did everything at the same time, so if you saw the other videos with like the engine noise and taking the bottom end apart, I replaced the rod bearings and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, so this is kind of how it's going. I will update you guys whenever I put better springs in here, and we'll see where the car actually sits. So I did have a 4-wheel alignment done when the car was first lifted. So now that it's sagged, my alignment's definitely off. But I have a feeling when I get the better springs in there again, it'll probably sit like it did in the first place. But all right, this video's been long enough. If you have any questions, put them in the comments. Thanks for watching.